sunsets and skies so blue. Mountains whisper stories of dreams so true. From oceans roaring wild to valleys deep, a heartbeat of a nation that will not sleep. Save South Africa, rise above the storm. Hands together strong, a new world is born. Beauty in our hearts, let it light the way. Evil cannot reign when we seize the day. The people sing louder than shadows can scream. Together we're stronger than the wicked scheme. The soil holds our history, roots run so long. A melody of freedom, we're singing strong. They may curse the land with lies they weave, but we hold the truth in what we believe. Their crowns may crumble, their thrones may fall, for the power is the people's above it all. Save South Africa, rise above the storm. Hands together strong, a new world is born. Beauty in our hearts, let it light the way. Evil cannot reign when we seize the day. People sing louder than shadows can scream. Together we're stronger than the wicked scheme. The people sing louder than shadows can scream. Together we're stronger than the wicked scheme. The people sing louder than shadows can scream. Together we're stronger than the wicked scheme. The soil holds our history, roots run so long. A melody of freedom, we're singing strong. They may curse the land with lies they weave and weave, but we hold the truth in what we believe. Their crowns may crumble, their thrones may fall, for the power is the people above it all. We know it all.
I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Thursday, May 29th, 2025. Welcome back to the program, folks. First off, let's be very clear about what the purpose of this broadcast is. I expect to be relatively brief as I pick through some comments that were made today by Penuel, the Black Pen. Now, let me be clear. I've had very little interaction with the gentleman. I have no bone to pick with him. I have not ever attacked him personally, and I'm not doing so today. So let's get that out of the way. Okay, so I first interacted with him briefly a couple of years ago, my recollection, when I had asked, I don't know if I'd asked to come on his I asked him to come on my program, and he indicated he was willing to do it, but then went quiet on me and never came back. Penuel owes me nothing. I owe him nothing. I don't pay guests. He's under no obligation to come on. That was the end of that. So I hadn't really interacted with him since then. While in South Africa, Rob Hersov suggested that I contact him about appearing on his YouTube channel. Okay, he also suggested I approach DJ Sabu and also Pofu Walsh. Well, I did. I sent each of them a message. The only one I think was maybe it was Pofu Walsh who said he couldn't do it. He couldn't find time. All right, I think it was him. And then DJ Sabu kindly invited me onto his program. I went on his program, and I thought it was a very good conversation with him. And then Nota Beloye, which was a bit of a surprise to me. That wasn't what I went on the program for, but it's fine. I don't think I was sandbagged. I just think that's the way things worked out. Anyway, so Penuel never responded to my message. I sent him a message and he just never responded. Now, I can't confirm, but people who attended my meet and greet in Durban said that he was actually in Durban at the casino area that day. They went to a different restaurant after my meet and greet that I held in Durban, and they saw Penuel there. Anyway, whatever, neither here nor there. So this morning, Penuel went live, and he is hot full. He's angry. He's a very angry man about Rob Hersov's lies. And so I've just listened to what he had to say, made some notes, and I probably got some typos here, so please forgive me. But I want to go through this and talk about it because while Penuel made some accurate points and was correct about some things, his understanding of history is very poor. And he really doesn't know South African history. It's ironic to listen to this. But anyway, he said the lies Rob Hersov spewed on the PBD podcast with Patrick Bet-David. Now, I haven't watched that. I don't watch that podcast, so I have no idea what Rob said. But Penuel said that Rob lied repeatedly. He said that Rob said there was a peaceful transfer because the National Party had a peaceful transfer. Well, Penuel denies that. He says the reason that apartheid ended was because the guerrilla armies ended apartheid. No, that's simply not true. And they said he also ended to avert a civil war. That's also not true. Not true at all. The civil war that the National Party was concerned about was coming from right-wing white groups like the Afrikaner Bewegung, the AWB, and those guys. And they were proved to be toothless in Bophuthatswana when those guys were murdered by the Bophuthatswana security forces. So it was not civil war. There was actually a civil war going on. The People's War was taking place in KwaZulu-Natal, Penuel, where the ANC was murdering thousands of IFP leaders, wiping out their leadership, necklacing innocent people. The ANC was a murderous gang that murdered thousands of black South Africans in a civil war. There was a civil war. They didn't end apartheid to prevent a civil war. Your understanding of history is completely warped. They ended apartheid because it was morally wrong and it was unsustainable. And see, this is what's the problem with people who go to South African universities and hear an altered version of history instead of the facts. The primary reason that the National Party ended apartheid is because they could no longer convince the white population that the security state needed to continue. Now, why could they no longer convince the white population of that in 1992 when the referendum was held? Because the Cold War had ended. For decades, the argument was the Swart Gevaar and the Rooi Gevaar, the black menace and the red menace. Well, the black menace had been proven to be a boogeyman in many respects because black African governments were successful in places like Botswana right next door. And you had the independence of Namibia and a good start there. So that was fading as a threat. Whites were no longer convinced that there was a black threat from that standpoint, many whites. And the real reason is because the prima facie excuse for having apartheid ended. South Africa had to be the menace against, had to be the bulwark against the menace of communism. Well, communism ended. Well, it didn't, but we thought it did in 1989 when the wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed by 1991. These are the reasons why apartheid ended, not because of guerrilla movements. Do you honestly think Umkhonto we Sizwe was ever a threat to the government of South Africa? Never. Rowdy students were a far bigger threat than MK and its sporadic bombings and attacks on people and infrastructure. So, Penuel, your understanding of history is completely wrong there, my friend. Guerrilla groups, guerrilla armies. There were no guerrilla armies. There were never more than about 2,500 actual members of MK Umkhonto we Sizwe. And many of them were murdered at Quatro in Angola. So let's get the facts straight here. The Cold War ending is the major impetus for the end of apartheid. Not international sanctions, not guerrilla armies, not the threat of a civil war. There was a civil war ongoing. And once the ANC had murdered sufficient numbers of IFP to weaken them, forcing Mangosuthu Buthelezi to withdraw from the election only to rejoin in the last moment, the ANC had achieved their goal and hoodwinked South Africa into thinking that they were the party of liberation when they're the party of murder and rampage. So that's the first point. So he claims that Rob is wrong. Rob was wrong, but so is Penuel. Then he says that Rob claims there was a meritocracy in South Africa before Jacob Zuma. But Penuel correctly states that BE was already underway. It wasn't a creation of Jacob Zuma. He is correct on that point. Then he says Rob said Zuma sent caters, and Penuel denies this. He said the caters were sent to loot and pillage. Well, in fact, he did send caters. That's exactly the policy that was implemented under Zuma. Now, you may take exception to the loot and pillage, but that's exactly what they did. That may not have been what Zuma sent them there for, but that's exactly what they did. Exactly what they did. Now, he claims that state-owned enterprises were profitable. Which ones? Eskom? South African Airways hasn't turned a profit in 15 years. So which state-owned enterprises were profitable? He talked about there was greater transformation. Well, transformation is code word for racial oppression, reversing the scales and committing racial oppression against the minority. That's what transformation is. There's no need to transform anything. You create an ownership society. Had South Africa done that, they wouldn't have the problems they have today. He claims that Zuma was successful with the radical economic transformation by spreading this transformation, but that's a lie. You're factually incorrect, Penuel. The number of black South Africans living in poverty has grown exponentially under the African National Congress and has grown every year, every single year under ANC rule since the late 1990s. So Zuma didn't spread transformation. He spread BS and he shared the wealth with caters and with the Guptas. So you're way off the mark here, Fred. Now, he does admit there was a lot of looting took place. Indeed. But he takes exception when Rob says that Zuma sent people, caters out to loot and steal. Well, fine. He says there's no evidence, but there's no evidence of what he just said. He offers no evidence whatsoever. He said that Rob claimed that Zuma removed civil servants, and Penuel denies this. Well, it's simply a matter of fact. I can show you dozens, if not hundreds, of South Africans who were forced out of work during the Zuma years, and also before that. It started under Mandela, forcing whites out of government and replacing with unqualified people. It started long before that. Next, Penuel talks about land. He said that Rob claimed that blacks own most land and that whites only own 21% of arable land. Well, Penuel is lying here and misleading, and Rob has got his numbers slightly wrong too. Now, Penuel does say something correct about land, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But the reality here is that land is mostly in the hands of black South Africans. That's a fact. If you consider the government to be black, which many black South Africans do, the government is the single largest landowner in South Africa. Then the Inganyama Trust controls 2.8 million hectares. You throw that on top of the 20 plus million hectares that the government owns, and the majority, not the majority, but the plurality of land, the largest percentage of land in private hands is in the hands of the government and Inganyama Trust. Never mind who's on farms and other things like that. So both of you are factually incorrect there. All right. Now, as far as 21% of arable land, I don't know that that's true. I don't know where Rob got that figure from. The reality is white South Africans under the 2017 land audit, which Penuel offers as evidence, and he's correct to offer that. In that, and Penuel is correct here, he says 72% of farmland, that's land designated farmland by the government, including places like the Karoo where there's nothing growing except sheep wandering around. But farmland, that 72% was owned by whites. But the way that the whites were determined is a question mark and never been fully explained by the government. But I'll accept the 72% figure, and I'll agree with Penuel that that's correct. But the problem, which Penuel doesn't address, is that that figure is used to lie about white ownership in South Africa of land. The media and politicians claim that whites own 72% land. It's factually untrue. It's never been the case since the end of apartheid. Not been the case. There are 120 plus million hectares of land in South Africa. 93 million hectares of land in 2017 were privately owned. Much less of that now because the government's bought 4 million hectares. So that's no longer privately owned. The government took over that, so that reduces that figure. But in 2017, according to the government data, whites owned 72% of the land designated as farmland. That was just 36 million of the 121 million hectares was farmland, which means that whites owned 29% of the privately held land as farmland, but only 21% of the surface area of the country was farmland under white ownership, according to the government's own figures. And that's perhaps where Rob gets it wrong saying arable land. Not all farmland is arable. You can't grow crops in the Karoo in many places, for instance, unless you irrigate it. So both of them are mistaken, but Penuel is lying because he's being dishonest. If he were honest here, he would say the fact of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, is that whites are the largest farm-owning community. And that's true. That's true. But he doesn't mention that that data is used to mislead people, because it is. And I bring you the whole story, not part of the story that you get from both sides here. Now he says that Rob argues that most farm murders are of white farmers. And Penuel makes a false claim that blacks are the most murdered. Of course, he just admits that there's no way of knowing this because the government doesn't classify farm murders by race. So how does he know that most farm workers are the ones who are murdered, not farmers? He claims that most of the people killed on farms are farm workers. But he admitted freely that there's no way to prove that. He just makes an unfounded claim. It's unsubstantiated, no evidence. And it doesn't really matter. As I've proven yesterday with the farm attack on a friend's mother and father in Brits, near Brits, the data is skewed. It's unreliable. They were attacked. It was a pre-planned, organized attack. They poisoned their dogs a few days before they planned this attack. That was the first thing they did. Then they stole the wheels off their bakkies so they couldn't escape. Then at 2 o'clock in the morning the following night, they broke in. They tied up a wheelchair-bound man, because he was white, tied him up and his wife, and then beat him with an iron and beat her with an iron. They stomped all over his hands. I have the photograph. I will show that later once they get the permission. That's what they did to this elderly gentleman. He had to beg for them not to kill them and rape his wife, which they didn't do, thankfully. But this wasn't reported as a farm attack. It wasn't reported as a farm attack. It was reported as a house robbery. So where's Penuel getting his data from? From the corrupt SAPs who failed to collect the data properly. So Penuel, if you're going to reference SAPs data, you have to be honest and say the data is corrupt. It's unreliable. For whatever reason, either because the police are incompetent or because the laws aren't written to include farm attacks. So when he says that most farm murders, well, let's put this in perspective. I agree with him, but I don't have the actual data. I just see it anecdotally. I do believe that more farm workers are murdered by criminals and thieves in farms than farm owners. I absolutely do believe that, but I don't have the data to support it. He doesn't either, but he makes a false claim. I'm telling you, I don't have the data. I just believe it based on anecdotal evidence. But over 4,000 white farmers and their family members have been tortured, murdered, assassinated, removed from the living in the past 31 years. Let's do a little bit of quick math on that. So 31, so that's how many per year? So 31 years, so that's going to be 4,000. Just go with that number. Divided by 31 years, that is 129 farmers per year murdered and their family members for 31 years. Now, many years is much higher than that. Some years is much lower. But he doesn't have the data to support his claim. And neither do I. But I'm telling you, it's unsubstantiated. He claims it's a fact. It's not a fact. It's not a fact. So Rob is wrong. Penuel is wrong because he states it's a fact. I'm telling you the truth. He claims that Rob is telling a lie when he says white farmers are being targeted. Well, Penuel, you're full of it. You're mistaken. You're completely wrong. You're completely wrong. I just gave you one instance that just occurred 2 nights ago in which white farmers were targeted. Virtually nothing was stolen and falsely reported as a house robbery instead of the domestic terrorism that it is to frighten people off the land. He says that Rob lied when he said there were no black people in the Cape in 1652. He claimed that the Xhosa arrived in the Cape in the year 500 AD. And what evidence does he provide for that? We have no archaeological evidence of the Xhosa being in the Cape in the year 500. We have evidence of the Nguni-speaking peoples crossing the Limpopo 1,600 years ago. So that's around 500 or 600 AD. That's the Zambezi and Limpopo, not the Cape. We don't have evidence of people in the Cape other than his claim. And then he says the Khoi were there for 30,000 years. I guess he's including them as black. They're not black. The Khoi have been there for at least 50,000 years, the Khoi and San, not 30,000 years. So he's factually incorrect there. He claimed that the Xhosa Wars are the reason that the Xhosa weren't at the Cape, had they been pushed back in the Eastern Cape, but that's factually untrue. That's simply untrue. Read John Laban's books about this, about the Xhosa Wars, the 6 wars that took place with the English, the Four-Trekkers, or the Trek Boers, whatever you want to call them, as they moved further east. And they ran into the region of the Great Fish River when they encountered large numbers of Xhosa. That doesn't mean there were never any Xhosa who came further east or west. Some did, but they weren't there in settlement. They weren't there in civilization. These two civilizations ran into each other in the region of the Great Fish River and fought 6 wars. Some started by one side, some started by the other side. And there were people used by the whites, the Mfengu, for instance, who fought for the whites and then were bitterly betrayed by the English, who disarmed them later on and impoverished them. So he's factually incorrect about that. He doesn't know the history. He's just making it up. He said that black traders gave Europeans goods, fresh fruits and vegetables at the Cape. What? Where's this coming from? The Khoi did. The Khoi traded with them, yes, after they chased the Portuguese away decades prior. And he's upset that Rob called Nelson Mandela a good guy in a bad party. Now, Penuel correctly states that Mandela was more brutal than Julius Malema, and then he goes on to a defense of Julius Malema. Penuel says that Mandela wasn't a good guy. Well, I've always been honest about Nelson Mandela. When I used to teach the Army War College and I would introduce Nelson Mandela as a terrorist, I would get gasped. How can you say he's a terrorist? Well, he's a self-described terrorist. Nelson Mandela was a boxer. He was a barrister. He was a traditional chief. He founded Mkhonto we Sizwe, a terrorist organization, and he described himself as a terrorist. He was put on trial in Rivonia in 1962, convicted of terrorism and sentenced to life in prison. So there's no question about it. Nelson Mandela resorted to an armed struggle. His argument was there was no other option. Whether you believe him or not is a different story. This isn't rubbishing Nelson Mandela. It's simply stating the facts, which is what Penuel is also trying to do. And I agree with Penuel. Nelson Mandela wasn't a good guy. But Penuel makes the argument, this is where he starts venturing to the racist language he likes to use. It's unfortunate he does this. He has an extreme hatred of white people based on what he said, despite his comments belying that. He has an extreme hatred of white people. For instance, he goes on here, he says, well, yeah, Nelson Mandela's a good guy, but only for those rich white racists who profited because he forgave them for their sins. Excuse me? Why are you railing on about this stuff? The majority of South Africans were born after apartheid. You need to grow up and stop the nonsense. Not you, Penuel, but people, black supremacists, and people who push this false narrative. Most people in South Africa were born after apartheid. They're not responsible for it. They're not beneficiaries of it. I don't hear this bullshit about generational wealth. My ancestors were nobility in Europe. I grew up in poverty. No flush toilet, fetching water from a cistern, living on food stamps as a child. I don't want to hear about generational wealth. Then he starts defending Julius Malema. Julius Malema is not a bad guy. He's just singing and chant. Seriously? So if a white South African runs around with the Union flag, is that okay? Because it hurts black South Africans' feelings. Is it okay for them to do that? You know, look, you're trying to equate Malema and Nelson Mandela. Malema is an insignificant fly. Mandela was a towering figure. Good or bad, a towering figure. Malema is a footnote in history. He's a jackass who's an attention seeker. And his singing and chanting that song is not simply about singing a song. It's racially divisive, and it's meant to be racially divisive. And your failure to acknowledge that is dishonest. It's disingenuous. Hardly an accurate description of Julius Malema. Then it goes on about evil white people and racists and their ill-gotten wealth and privilege. They want to preserve it. That's why they like Mandela. Most white South Africans have been conditioned to like Nelson Mandela with the fairy tale story that had been indoctrinated them growing up in school. That's why most white South Africans like Nelson Mandela, not because they profited from racism. Your juvenile, ridiculous stereotyping of white South Africans is unfortunate and dishonest. Then he takes exception to what Rob had to say about Shell and Exxon leaving South Africa because of the ANC. Penuel claims that that's not true. He says they're pulling out of South Africa to focus on other aspects of business, keeping, for instance, Shell's keeping their upstream business. Well, that's true. But they reduced their operations in upstream because of the constraints put on them by lunatics stopping them from doing sounding off the south coast of South Africa, among other things. So Penuel has a partially correct story here that they are focusing on other things. But they're not leaving South Africa simply because they're focusing on other business activities. Doing business in South Africa is incredibly difficult on the ANC. Be honest. Here you're just being nitpicking at what Rob had to say. And he said that Rob claimed that no American company would invest in South Africa. Penuel says 600 companies are there. Well, yeah, they're not in South Africa because they're in South Africa for South African business. They're in South Africa because it's a launching pad to reach the rest of the continent. Because the collapsing infrastructure is still adequate enough and the air links are still sufficient that business people can do business from South Africa and cover much of the continent. That's why. They can't do that from Accra. They can't do that from Addis. They can't do that from Nairobi. So they do it from Joburg and Cape Town. That's why American companies are there, not for the profit they're going to make in South Africa. Some of them are, but most of them are there because it's a launch pad for Africa. Tell the full story, Penuel. Don't cherry pick what you think is true. He claims that Elon Musk does not mind bringing Starlink to South Africa. And he obviously hates Elon Musk. You should have heard what he had to say about Elon Musk. But that's untrue. That's untrue. First off, Penuel, tell the whole story. Elon Musk and Starlink have never applied for an operating license in South Africa to ICASA. They haven't applied. So what do you mean they don't mind bringing it to South Africa to profit from the evil place where white genocide is? Because that's what he claimed Elon said. And he actually did say that in a tweet, white genocide. Elon Musk has never applied for a license. So what do you mean he has no problem bringing it to South Africa? Once he applies for a license, then you can make that claim. But right now, that's just utter nonsense that you're saying that. That's your opinion. And it's not based on fact. Elon Musk may very well be happy bringing it to South Africa, but we don't know that. And the indicator that he's not happy is that he hasn't even applied for a license. Still, even after the past week of kowtowing and the fake blitz by South Africa, they're going to alter the rules to let Starlink. There's been no application. Show me the application from ICASA by Starlink. It doesn't exist, Penuel. Tell the whole story. Then he mostly gets correct the story about why the ANC supports the Palestinians. Because he said they supported the ANC during the liberation movement. Yeah, so did the East Germans, the Chinese, the Cubans, and they have ties to these folks, and the Russians. But it was the Soviet Union, not Russia, that supported them. And it was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, not Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization designated by virtually the entire world. Why would you be friends with a terrorist organization? You can support Palestinians and not support Hamas. So, Penuel, you're not being factually correct here either. Now, he is correct in saying that Israel supported the National Party during apartheid. In fact, they did. They surreptitiously sent military assistance and equipment and arms and ammunition there. Absolutely. That's true. They did. But most people in the ANC didn't even know that, especially those born after 1994. So that hatred shouldn't be there any longer. So your explanation of why the ANC supports Palestinians is disingenuous or just factually, not fully informed. But I do agree with you that the historical ties are there, and that's one of the reasons why they support the PLO. But they also support the PLO because of evil people like Naledi Pandor, a late convert to Islam in life, who supplicates herself at the well of terrorism in Tehran and with Hamas. Then he goes on to talk about the Truth Report, saying Rob has put this together, and he calls it right-wing voices. Well, that's dishonest. Have you watched any of the videos? Do you actually know the people? You read through a list of South African contributors there. You never mention me. I'm not right-wing. Never mention me. Centrist, right of center, but not right-wing. Anyway. He claims that Johan Rupert is the most influential person in South Africa, followed by Patrice Motsepe and, of course, a few other people. And these people are very influential. But in South Africa, not elsewhere. Rupert's presence in the Oval Office had zero impact for the positive for South Africa. In fact, it was a negative. Didn't help move the needle, showing you the limited influence of Johan Rupert. And then he's upset about these people because they're rich white people who are people of privilege. Well, Patrice Motsepe is not, but you get my point. Well, Penuel, Johan Rupert's wealth is built largely around the world, not in South Africa through Richemont, which you correctly mentioned he has. Interesting full disclosure, I own a small number of shares in Richemont. Bought them at $6 a share. They're worth about $9 now, last time I checked. He talks about Rob Hersov's podcast tour of America, saying Rob has no respect for South African sovereignty. I suppose the ANC and the Pan-African Congress had no respect for South Africa's sovereignty either during the liberation struggle. How is that any different? People feeling besieged by a government that racially oppresses them and they're seeking help from abroad. Who cares whether they respect South Africa's sovereignty? The ANC didn't respect South Africa's sovereignty. Were they right? Many would argue they were. If you're going to be honest about things, why don't you tell the story about that? The ANC Pan-African Congress going to London, Berlin, Washington, lobbying for sanctions, demanding, begging for people to support their liberation movements to end apartheid. Who says they were right? Well, who says they were wrong? So who's to say that AfriForum and Rob Hersov and others whom you were bumhurt about are wrong? Tell the whole story, Penuel, not just cherry pick your version of it. Because you're taking the sanctimonious position that you're right. You don't know you're right. He said Rob and AfriForum are on the same level of ruining South Africa as the ANC. That's comical and pathetic to say the least. AfriForum has provided safety to white, black, Indian, colored neighborhoods across the country. I've gone on community patrols protecting these communities without regard to race or class. AfriForum has assisted minority black groups who are being oppressed by the government and not getting title to their land and looking for ways to preserve their culture. They've helped them. But you and others in South Africa characterize them in a false light all the time because you're unwilling to learn what AfriForum is actually doing because they're white and you can't get past that. But not all their members are white, by the way. Just to inform you. And Rob Hersov is destroying South Africa like the ANC? Really? What has Rob done to collapse the infrastructure of South Africa? What has Rob done to undermine ownership of corporations? What has Rob done to make the police dysfunctional or the criminal court system dysfunctional? What has Rob done in deploying cable? None of that. That's utter nonsense, Penuel. You're just bumhurt because you don't like Rob, because you don't like what he had to say. Be honest. Be honest here. AfriForum and Rob Hersov are destroying and ruining South Africa the way ANC is. That's utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. That's just the grumblings of somebody whose feelings are hurt. Now, he says the problem is the ANC sold out the revolution. That's not the problem. The problem is the revolution. There's no need for revolution in South Africa. There's simply a need for equality and for an honest government. That's all. Had the government of South Africa created a national sovereign wealth fund instead of shaking down wealthy corporations and giving the money to the likes of Patrice Motsepe and Tokyo Sexwale and Cyril Ramaphosa and a few other connected wealthy black individuals, had they given that wealth and put it in a sovereign wealth fund, that money could have been paid out in the form of dividends to South Africans based on need for the past 31 years, building an ownership society. Had the South African government focused on education instead of demonically focusing on removing Afrikaners who were teaching because they were teaching black students, you can't have that. If they had not done that and simply brought qualified black teachers up when they came up instead of in mass replacing Afrikaners in the civil service, you wouldn't have the abysmal education level you have now. You wouldn't have people desperate for subsistence farming and begging in the streets. And had they fixed policing to turn policing into community policing instead of allowing the likes of Jackie Salibe, a gangster, and Beckett Seeley, a clown, run the police into the ground, then you would have community safety, law and order, investment, educational outcomes, and you would have South Africans developing apps and doing genetic research and participating in the fourth industrial revolution instead of the ANC trying to put them in subsistence farming. Tell the whole story, Penuel. Tell the whole story. Then he blames rich white people for looting state-owned enterprises in collusion with the ANC. Show me the state-owned enterprise where rich white people have the contracts. They're excluded from the contracts by BEE, Penuel, which you think is the right way to transform society, by giving stakes to corrupt companies that never fulfill their contracts and deliver painted rocks instead of coal to power plants, for one example. The revolution is the problem. The revolution ended decades ago. This revolutionary spirit is caustic. Blaming rich white people for the failure of black politicians is pathetic. He says people traveling around the world spreading lies about South Africans, what? Claiming that's illegal? It's not illegal. It's free speech. And what lies are they spreading? There haven't been 4,000 white farmers and their family members tortured and murdered in South Africa since 1994? Really? The infrastructure isn't collapsing. South Africa doesn't have the 78th rated ports in the world, the worst amongst exporting nations. They don't? Really? That wasn't my assessment. South Africa's credit rating is in junk bond status. That wasn't my assessment. There aren't 26,000 murders per year in South Africa. That isn't my assessment. There aren't 3 times as many black South Africans leaving abject poverty 30 years after the ANC took over than when the National Party ruled the country. That's not my assessment. That's the facts. That's South African government's data. The Inganyoma Trust doesn't own 2.8 million hectares of land in trust. No blacks allowed to own the land. No whites allowed to live on it. That's a fact. So what lies are people telling about South Africa? What, the white genocide? Get over it. Get over it. He says The whites refuse to share the land. Wow, thank you for stereotyping 4.8 million white people. They refuse to share the economy. What a crock of manure. What a crock of manure. Most successful, small-scale, commercial black farmers who have succeeded in the past 15 years have done so in no small measure because of the help of their neighbors who are commercial farmers who are white, who want them to succeed. Refuse to share the land. Share what land? The Karoo? They carry on being privileged. Really? That's not what I saw west of Pretoria. The people you're talking about are no different than the privileged black elites who are more numerous in number than the whites now. But you don't talk about that. You don't talk about the rich caters and BE tender paneers who outnumber the rich white people by a factor of probably 5 or 10 to 1, if not more. And yes, white people on average have higher GDP per capita income. That's correct. But that's not because of racism. That's because of ANC policies. You're unhappy with the ANC, but you don't recognize their failures in contributing to the prolonged misery of black South Africans. You blame it on rich white people. Dude, you really need to get a clue. He called Peter Hersov the leader of the Freedom Front Plus. Dude, he hasn't been the leader of Freedom Front Plus for 2 months. You got to keep up with the times. It's Corny Mulder. And he quoted Cyril Ramaphosa's pandering nonsense in Parliament. Why don't you want to share the economy? That's horse manure. Horse manure. Whites have been forced to share the economy and had their equity taken over and destroyed company after company after company by rapacious thieves. Don't want to share the economy? He claimed that BE's been ring-fenced for the ANC and their rich white friends. Well, this obsession with white people and rich white people is very disturbing, Penuel. They've been ring-fenced for the ANC and their rich black friends and some rich white friends. But the rich white friends can't get the contracts. So what are you talking about? It's really nauseating to listen to this analysis. Let the black entrepreneurs get equity in your business. That's what he said. Let black entrepreneurs have equity in your business. Why should I give equity in my business to anyone unless they invest in my company or bring something to the table? Why must I be forced to give up equity in my business that I start in South Africa because somebody's black? Why doesn't a black person start a business? If I have an idea and start a business for solar panels, why must I give my equity away? Why? My money didn't come from South Africa. My money came from my life of saving, investing, and working my tail off to escape poverty. So why should I be forced to give it to a black South African? Or to a white South African for that matter? Should be forced to give it to anybody. That's simply wrong. And your mindset is completely wrong, Penuel. Let the black entrepreneurs get equity in your business. That's exactly what happened for the past 30 years. And look what happened to the country. Now, Penuel says he's no longer disappointed. He's now accepting what's happening. That people are spreading propaganda to the United States so rich, racist white people get their way. That's what he said. He called them white supremacists. He said this minority capital, white minority capital, with their Western mates. Well, I take personal offense to your racist language there, Penuel. That's exactly what that is, racist language. Western mates, you're implying that we're racist. We've done more for your country than you ever believe you think you possibly can, Penuel. $8.1 billion to fight HIV. Millions of South Africans are alive because of our generosity. $500 million a year. Money for gender-based violence, for trade. We've invested billions of dollars in your economy, only to get abused by people calling us racist, because that's what that is. That's a dog whistle calling Americans racist, your Western mates. He says Donald Trump, who does not give a fuck about South Africa. Well, you're right. He doesn't. Why should he care about South Africa? It's a disaster. It's a total mess. And also he said he's looking forward to reading people's comments. Now, this was moments before he began pimping his bottled water. That's his prerogative. He's welcome to make money. It's a capitalist world. But that was kind of unseemly. Looking forward to your comments. It was kind of hard to comment because he blocked the comments. The chat was turned off. So I posted a comment on the video. It's kind of hard to do that because you turned the chat off, presumably. What he wanted was for people to comment after the fact, which I did. So maybe that's what he wanted. Now, Penuel takes great exception to rich white people. It hurts him. He has severe rectal bleeding based on how badly he feels. He's bum hurt. Okay. He says he tried to engage these white people. Well, I reached out to you. I'm not rich. I'm middle class. You say you want to talk to middle class white people, but you didn't even have the courtesy to respond to my message. Now, yes, it was unsolicited. You have no obligation to respond to that. But you could have the courtesy and say, sorry, I'm not interested or too busy. But you just ignored it. And yes, I have your correct phone number. So I'm not bumhurt that you didn't answer. You're under no obligation to answer or to have me on your program. It's your program. And you're under no obligation to come to my program. But you are under an obligation to tell the truth and tell the whole story and not mislead people. You're angry at Rob Hersov? I understand why. Rob said some things were incorrect, but so did you in your response. You said a lot of things were factually incorrect or partial truths. And telling part of the story is dishonest, just like telling lies. And there you have it, folks. That's my response. I just wanted to put this out there. Again, not an attack on Penuel. He got a lot of things correct in refuting some of the things that Rob Hersov had to say. And Rob's on my program tomorrow. But you don't get to pick and choose history. You don't get to pick and choose facts. MK and the Pan-African Congress Army are not the reason that apartheid ended. A civil war is not the reason apartheid ended. There was a civil war. The only civil war the National Party was concerned about was from right-wing white groups, like the AWB, which never materialized. There was a civil war. ANC murdered thousands of IFP. And to be fair, IFP murdered some ANC in response. Thousands necklaced, assassinated, shot, killed by the ANC. There was a civil war in KwaZulu-Natal in the 1990s, starting late 1980s, fomented by the ANC. Tell the whole story, Penuel. That wasn't at risk of causing country. If these rich white people were racist and didn't want black people around, why would they stop? Why would they want to stop that war? In fact, the claims are that the security services fueled that war with no evidence ever produced. There you go. There you go, folks. All right. Gwen says the audience you're trying to correct would rather believe the pen than to hear the truth. Lies generate more clicks than truth. Well, not everyone is like that. Not everyone's like that. Anyway. All right. So, yeah, thank you all for being here. I haven't had a chance to read the chat. I'm just going to go through and look for a few things here. Penuel is obsessed with rich whites. He is. It's an unhealthy obsession. I agree. And that's what came across to me. I've never criticized the guy. I've never really said much about him. He has his channel. He's got like 106,000 subscribers. Good on him. He said some interesting things in the past, but he also delves and goes into this anti-rich white people thing. Anyway, he's entitled as most of them are. Thankfully, many of them are awake to the truth. Yep. Work for what you want in life. Exactly. I work for everything I have. I earned everything I have. I inherited nothing. My mother died. I didn't get a penny. My father died. I didn't get a penny. Not a penny. And I didn't ask for a penny. I don't expect a penny. Didn't get anything. No life insurance, no inherited wealth, no businesses, no property, no nothing. And that's how people should be. You shouldn't expect handouts. There's nothing wrong with inheriting wealth, but I never inherited. Golly says, thank you. They're so shameful to keep on blaming other people for the problems. Exactly. Okay. Taking is not solution. It is not creating. Exactly. That's part of the problem. Demand the British give me a Lecker 1 million check for the atrocities in those camps. Exactly. Why doesn't he give people equity in his bottled water company? There you go. There you go. That would mean there would get 41 million people who did not get their slice of cake. Not to mention 40 years of just 19 cents a day. You can help a poor African child. Yeah. Never show the white squatter camps. Well, I went to one. I'm 100% not going to watch this guy anymore. I hope many do. I didn't know you watched him already, Pat. No, I watched him. And look, I'm not here to pick a fight with Penuel. But, I mean, if you're going to tell the story that you're angry with Rob Hersov, tell the whole story. I did. Now, I'm sure I left a few things out that were partly germane, but I'm not going to spend 3 hours refuting things. But I covered it pretty well by giving both sides of the story. Cheryl said in the recent discussion, black people should be rich and not water carriers. Well, billions were available. Yeah, well, there was plenty of money. And there are rich black South Africans, more of them than white South Africans. So why the obsession with rich white South Africans? His entitlement is showing, just imagine white people demand to own other people's stuff. Exactly. Why don't you give black people your equity in your company? Why? Why? Why should anyone have to do that? I think it's owed because of apartheid. Yeah, exactly. This obsession with apartheid needs to end too. You can't use this excuse forever for failure. Don't understand why people are obsessed with what whites have in this country. Because they are. People are. Lots of farmers' land is held by the bank. Exactly. They don't actually own the land. Yep. Anyway, so there you go, folks. Black folks were poor even before white people got to Africa. That's true. The greedy, corrupted, incompetent Southern politicians must be exposed to the world. They enrich themselves. They do. Statute of limitations be, there is no such thing. Anyway, folks, yeah, so that's revenge addiction. There you go. Cool pleasing. Now, that's exactly right. Revenge addiction. That's what's going on here. Yeah, he sees himself as a god. Isn't that how he describes himself? I've seen that. Patrick says, I think that 76% is among working arable land. No, it's not. No. Read the 2017 land audit. I read it when it came out, and I wrote on it in 2017, 2018, and I've covered it ever since then. The 72% is of the 36 million hectares of land designated agriculture, whether they're swampland or sugarcane fields or wheat fields or pig farms or Karoo sheep farms. That's farmland, not arable. Had nothing to do with arable. Only 12, 13% of South Africa's surface area is actually arable for crop rotation, crop farming. So that couldn't possibly be the two. Can't mix the two. It's 72% of what was designated by the government as farmland. Ricky Sang says, we Indians are told to go back to India. Yeah, it is a slur. It's racist. It's racist. It happens all the time. Marty have done so well without complaining with anything coming from here as slaves. Yeah, well, you didn't come as slaves. You came as indentured servants. You weren't slaves. There was no slavery. The conditions may have been slave-like, but it wasn't slavery. It was indentured workers. That's what they were. Yep. All right. The thing most white people, whoops, where'd that go? White people get is that white people benefited from apartheid and black people are behind because they can't afford quality education. Well, you shouldn't have to afford quality education. Primary and secondary schools should be free of charge. There should be no school fees, and it should not be run by central governments. It should be run by local school boards. But Bella upsets all that. Worked hard with my late husband on a farm. Not rich, white old lady. White old lady, not privileged at all. These people talking through their rear ends must get over themselves. Agreed, Ingrid's inspirations. Remember Eddie on 06 June will be the 5th anniversary since he was killed. Gabriel. Rob is going to be so hurt by this. The saddest part is that Rob really cares about Penuel. It's more personal than Penuel will admit. I have no idea. I don't know if Rob cares about Penuel or what. I don't know. All I know is that, as someone said here, he seems to be obsessed by rich white people, and that's not really helping the argument. And claiming that Afri Forum and Rob are as ruinous to South Africa as the ANC is just ludicrous. CNN woman saying that they should go back to Europe is equivalent of saying everyone is settled in the U.S. must return home. Yeah, so all the black Americans must go home to Africa then if she's going to make that stupid comment. That's ridiculous. No, the sheep farmers and the crew are not exactly rolling in cash, that's for sure. It's a very harsh life. Yep. Yeah, I don't know, Aaron Eusta, if he misrepresented what Rob said because I didn't watch that podcast. I stated that at the outset. I didn't watch what was said on that podcast. So I don't know. I don't watch the Ben Shett, whatever that thing is. Most of those things. I don't watch the Rubin Report. I don't watch those things. I just don't watch them. So, I don't know what was said. Yeah, my interview will be tomorrow. Layman says they must get paid if you go to school and don't get a job. Tom Hawk wants to know how I'm doing. I'm okay. More the General Theon, the National Party were concerned than the AWB. Yes, Patrick, there was more. That's correct. But they're also worried about the military doing something. Bruno says, absolutely 100%, Colonel, you know more of South Africa than South Africans. Bravo, these youngsters today in South Africa don't know South African past or how South Africa actually looked like. It was heaven on earth. Well, it's heaven on earth for many people, but for some people it wasn't heaven on earth, and we have to be honest about that. We have to be honest about that. And it was more than some, it was a lot of people. Paid school fees, not compulsory in the 80s and 90s. Poor families did not pay. My late dad could not afford to. I used to think Penuel was logical and analytical, but yet again, another black man proving, sucking facts and figures out of his thumb. Most of our industries are held by monopoly and mentality. Correct. I've said this, Valerie von Vijk, many, many times. South Africa is run by oligarchy, a series of oligarchies, a banking oligarchy, a retail oligarchy, and a agriculture oligarchy. Not most farmers, but the big agri-farmers. And those oligarchies don't want to upset the apple cart. They don't want to upset their access to wealth. And they run the country like oligarchs. And they do so with the ANC's consent. And they're not exclusively white. They're very heavively black. Patrice Motsepe, Toka Sexwale, Cyril Ramaphosa, some of those involved. Yep. He was great and then went a complete 360. Don't think he believes half what he says. I don't know what he believes. I've never talked to him. Yeah, no, Ralph, the Islamic State of Africa is not a topic for this conversation. I've already covered it, and I will cover it in a separate video. Yeah, it's 72% of land held by private individuals, which works out. No. It's not 72% of land held by private individuals. That's factually incorrect too. Get it correct. It's 72% of the agricultural land. 36 million hectares, 26 million. We're talking about 26 million hectares owned by whites in a country of 121 million hectares. That's not private land. There's 93 million hectares of private land. So it's not even 72% of private land. It's 29% of private land, not 72%. See, this people need to read the report and get it right. If black man goes to white man with respect, the white man will give his shirt off his back. Don't forget Johann Rupert. Yeah, I mentioned Johann Rupert earlier. I tell you, if all whites leave South Africa, they'll still blame apartheid, correct? Yes, LB, digital marketing. The farm attack happened outside of Brits, and I'm the only journalist that covered it, to my knowledge. I don't know if any YouTubers covered it, but I'm the only independent journalist and the only media outlet, the White Independent News, that actually covered that attack. I don't really care what Dan Corder has to say on Piers Morgan. I have very little respect for Piers Morgan, bringing a moron like Dan Corder onto his program. It's changing the history. Kids learning not much proper history. Correct, Stephanie. Congo Chris, thank you for the 14 Rand super chat. Also inherited nothing. I admit I had the privilege of opportunity, but I didn't use it. It'd be in the gutter. Yep. Well, I didn't have the privilege of opportunity. I was denied opportunity on multiple occasions. Need to aim his anger at the black politicians that have sold the country down the river, not the people pointing this out. Yep. Father arrived with Jan and Rebeck. Where am I supposed to go after 100 years? Well, nowhere, Lee. You're home. What do they want to do with the land? Let it go fallow. Look at the farms in KZN that were taken over, completely rubbish, destroyed, useless. Nothing but disputes by landowner associations. It's ridiculous. Social fabric crime is also in question. Okay. Media won't cover it. Police reports are incorrect. The stats are thus distorted, and those skewed reports then make it seem like nothing is wrong. Exactly. That's why I'm saying that Penuel is quoting police statistics, which we know are unreliable, and I can prove they're unreliable with the case that just happened. Just one case. I can prove with dozens, hundreds of cases. They lie about it. House robbery. It wasn't a house robbery. It's domestic terrorism. At a minimum, it was aggravated assault. They beat people. They restrained people and beat them. Elderly people. Yep. Anyway, what time is you in with Rob tomorrow? 9 a.m. Eastern Standard, 3 p.m. South Africa time. Hey, Susan, how's it going? Your husband came to see me in Centurion. Oh, okay. Lee, I'm drawing a blank. I saw hundreds of people there, but I'm glad we got to meet. Okay. All I know is that the current atmosphere in the country refugee program is definitely a go. Yes, folks, the refugee program is definitely a go. It's happening. And people are coming to America. And I'll let you know after people have arrived. All right? hate is exhausting. That's why I don't hate. All right, folks. The next program will be at 11 Eastern, which will be 5 p.m. South Africa time. The Bribers is back. Byron Shepard from Morning Shot and Chris Wyatt from Chris Wyatt Africa will be right here on the program. That's in 34 minutes. You're welcome to tune in if you like and join us. Thanks for being here. Be sure to hit the like button. We got 1,400 people here, and we haven't hit 1,000 likes. And Dreo Fick, look closely at this man. This is what you call journalism. I salute you, sir. Thank you for the 50 Rand super chat. Yeah, thank you. But I'm sure that someone will tell Penuel this is here, and I don't know if he'll take it personally because it wasn't directed personally at him. I did respond to him, but I mean, he didn't give the full story, and so he needs to give the full story. He wants to be upset at Rob. He's welcome to be upset at Rob. I don't know if he misrepresented what Rob said because I didn't watch the broadcast. All I had to go off of was what he said, and I made my notes on what he said. All right, cool. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. 964 likes. We still got 1,400 people here. Can we push that up to 1,000? The Bri Brews, and then after the Bri Brews, 15-minute late start will be my daily news, and then I have to go to the dentist. I have to go to the dentist again for a follow-up. So I'll be at the dentist. Tomorrow, Rob Hersov, and then the news, and in the afternoon, it's the Stormers on the road in Glasgow, taking on the Warriors. And hopefully we'll win that quarterfinal game. It's tomorrow evening, South Africa, tomorrow afternoon here at 2:30. So that's 8:30 South Africa time on Rugby Ascendant, where I've lost 4 subscribers last month. I lost 4 subscribers because I didn't do any videos. Shame. Shame, shame, shame. All right, folks. You're welcome. Thanks a lot. We'll see you shortly. Busy day for me, as always. Have a good time. And anyway, again, no animosity towards Penuel, but your obsession with rich white people is bizarre. Why aren't you obsessed with rich black people who are destroying South Africa? And your misplaced anger at AfriForum is wildly off the mark. You can be angry at Rob Hersov. That's a personal issue, but you're wrong about AfriForum. And the fact that you're not considering that you're wrong is disturbing. Anyway, folks, that's it. Take care. We'll catch you here in about 30 minutes right here on the same channel. Same bad channel. Not same bad time, 11 a.m., 5 South Africa time. Cheers.